The zipper on my suitcase slid closed with a smooth finality that felt oddly satisfying. I pressed down gently on the lid, clicked the lock shut, and took a breath. Not a deep, trembling breath, but the kind that came with acceptance. The kind of breath you take when you've known for a long time that something is over. Behind me, laughter rang out from the living room, Ethan's voice followed by Brielle's grating giggle. I didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed this moment too many times to let it pull at me. I glanced around the bedroom that used to be mine, ours. The bed was still unmade from last night, though I hadn't slept in it. A new pink throw pillow, clearly not my taste, had found its way into the mix, and a pair of Brielle's heels rested beneath the vanity. She was marking territory already. I'd give her points for speed if I were in a generous mood. But I wasn't. Dragging my suitcase out of the room, I moved down the hallway toward the front door, the wheels humming softly against the hardwood. The smell of strong espresso wafted from the kitchen. Ethan had finally figured out how to use the fancy machine I bought last year. How ironic. The moment I stopped trying to make this house a home, he started appreciating the pieces I'd left behind. There she is, Ethan called out with a smug grin as I stepped into view. He lounged across the sectional, arms slung over Brielle's shoulders like a trophy he'd just claimed. She was barefoot, wearing my cashmere cardigan like it belonged to her, legs tucked under her like she owned the place. Need help with that? He asked, gesturing to the suitcase. No, I said calmly. I've got it. You're being very mature about this, he continued, tone dripping with faux admiration. No drama. No fighting. That's good. I mean, let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I nodded once, my face composed. Inside, I wanted to laugh. Uglier? He thought this was as bad as it would get? You don't need to worry about legal stuff, he added, waving a hand dismissively. No need for paperwork or dragging lawyers into this. You walk away, clean slate. I'll take care of everything. I looked him dead in the eye. Of course you will. He smiled wider, thinking I'd agreed to his terms. Brielle leaned into him, playing the part of the doting partner like she'd been cast for the role. Maybe in her mind, she had. She didn't know the lines, though. Didn't realize how this play would end. You sure you've got everything? Ethan asked, his voice oozing with fake concern. You won't be coming back, so just make sure. Oh, I've got what I need, I said, my hand on the doorknob. Everything important is already taken care of. He raised an eyebrow, but I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Not now. One last look around the space that used to be my life, then I opened the door. Morning light poured in, bright and clean. A crisp breeze touched my skin as I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled fresher than I remembered. Probably because I hadn't really breathed in months. Years, if I was honest. As I wheeled my suitcase down the steps and toward the waiting rideshare, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The past was behind me, and the past was burning. Quietly, strategically, but burning nonetheless. The driver didn't speak as I slid into the back seat. I appreciated that. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. My phone buzzed as the car pulled away from the curb, and I glanced at the screen. A group chat labeled FEC Ops Team blinked with a single message, ready when you are. I let the message sit for a moment before responding. Ethan thought he had everything under control. He thought I was walking away quietly, head bowed, hands empty. But I wasn't the woman he believed I was, not anymore. Maybe I never had been. I typed out one word soon and hit send. Then I settled into the seat, leaned my head back, and let the city blur past the window. The car wasn't just taking me away from him, it was taking me toward something else. Toward justice. Toward freedom. Toward the truth I'd been preparing to unleash for 3 long years. Let Ethan laugh in his living room with his 20-something distraction. Let him bask in his own arrogance for just a little longer. He didn't realize yet that the exit I took wasn't just from the house. It was from the role he cast me in, from the shadow he thought I'd live in forever. And soon, very soon, he'd learn what happened when you underestimated a woman who knew your secrets better than you did. My exit wasn't an end. It was the beginning of his unraveling. The moment the car rounded the corner and Ethan's house vanished from the rearview mirror, I dropped the mask I'd been wearing. Calm. submissive, defeated. The Danielle Ethan thought he knew. I let my fingers unlock the second phone hidden in the lining of my handbag, the one he never knew existed. This wasn't the line I used to order groceries or confirm spa appointments. This was the line for real work, the line to the Federal Economic Crime Bureau. I scrolled through the encrypted chat and typed, Phase 1 complete. Exited primary location. The replies came fast, efficient. Good. You're clear. Proceed to Safe House B. Team Bravo is in motion. I let out a breath that wasn't relief so much as release. 3 years. 3 years of split screens, of managing Ethan's demands while meticulously unraveling the web of deceit he spun around Redbrook Capital. I was never just a quiet wife with an invisible job in some government building. I was a senior agent, specializing in high-level financial crime and corporate fraud. And Ethan Carter, darling husband and self-declared financial genius, had been my biggest assignment yet. He never saw it coming. He thought I filed paperwork all day, probably imagined me making coffee for someone else with a real job. It suited me that way. Every time I came home tired or missed dinner, I let him believe it was from mundane reports or federal red tape. He never asked questions because, deep down, he didn't care. That was the first mistake he made. The second was underestimating how much I saw and remembered. Redbrook Capital looked clean on the surface, but I knew better. Offshore accounts masked under shell corporations. Falsified investor reports. Embezzlement buried beneath charity donations. Ethan's arrogance wasn't just personal, it was professional. He thought regulations were for the slow and the stupid. And he'd laugh whenever someone got caught, saying, only idiots leave a trail. Except he had. He just didn't know who was watching. I thought back to the day I first flagged him to the bureau. It was late, and he'd fallen asleep on the couch after one too many scotches. I'd sat at the dining table with my laptop open, staring at a series of fund transfers that didn't match his supposed company expenses. It would have been easy to close the screen, to look away. I didn't. Instead, I opened a new file, titled its subject, Redbrook, Level 3 Priority, and began. That night, I started living 2 lives. Danielle Carter, the elegant, accommodating wife. And Agent Carter, the one gathering enough evidence to bring down an empire built on lies. Over the next few years, I learned to split myself. One half remembered dinner reservations, smiled politely at cocktail parties, and endured Brielle's sudden drop-ins with barely veiled contempt. The other half decoded financial spreadsheets late into the night, consulted with forensic analysts, and planted surveillance software in Ethan's devices, software I had disguised as home security upgrades. He never questioned the login requests, never noticed the keystroke trackers. He had no idea that the passwords he set in his office were being recorded in real time from our bedroom across the hall. What Ethan didn't realize was that I never needed a divorce. Never needed to fight for half. I'd never put anything in my name. Everything was his on paper. And soon, everything of his would be frozen, seized, or auctioned off. I'd watched other cases where wives fought tooth and nail in court to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. I didn't envy them. I didn't want to claw at the scraps. I wanted the whole operation dismantled. My phone buzzed again. This time, a direct message from Director Nguyen. Asset inventory complete. Proceed to Greenlight 2 protocol. I nodded to myself. The groundwork had been laid. We had the encryption keys, the account numbers, the internal memos. Ethan's empire was a house of cards built on counterfeit promises, and I had the wind at my back. The car pulled into the underground garage of a sleek building in the city's South District. Not the usual safe house. This one was for high-level agents only. I entered through the side elevator, using a biometric scan that confirmed my identity in seconds. As the doors opened, I walked into the private operations suite where monitors lined the walls, each one streaming real-time data from Redbrook Capital, Ethan's private accounts, and the home he now shared with his naive new girlfriend. Agent Patel looked up from his desk. You're early. Ethan's predictable, I replied, setting my bag down. That makes everything easier. He handed me a file. Your full clearance log. Everything's set for the raid. We've confirmed he'll be en route to Redbrook HQ at exactly 8:45 tomorrow morning. Our team intercepts him at 9 o'clock. Simultaneous hits at the residence and corporate office. I scan the papers, my heart steady. This was the moment I'd been working toward, the moment I stopped being the woman behind the man and became the one who pulled the curtain back on the entire illusion. He thought I was leaving quietly, that he'd gotten away with everything. But the truth was, I wasn't leaving at all. I was about to take everything. The first thing I did when I joined the Federal Economic Crime Bureau wasn't study financial code or money laundering techniques. It was learn how to be invisible. Silent strategy, they called it. The art of moving without disruption, of gathering power without ever being seen. It was how I survived 15 years with Ethan Carter. Not as a victim, but as an observer. Every time he called me, just a civil servant, I sharpened the blade of my patience. He always said he liked that I wasn't flashy, not like the other wives in his circle. No plastic surgery, no flashy Instagram posts, no dramatic fights in public. Just calm, reliable Danielle. The woman who remembered his mother's birthday, kept the bar stocked with his preferred whiskey, and never questioned where the money came from. That was the illusion. And he loved it. I think he mistook my silence for ignorance. That's what made him comfortable enough to show his hand. I remember the first time he dismissed one of my subtle warnings. We were in the kitchen. He was sipping a scotch, scrolling through his tablet while I stirred dinner on the stove. You know, I'd said casually Redbrook's latest portfolio seems overleveraged. Those offshore positions might raise flags. He didn't even look up. Just smirked and replied, "Let me handle the grown-up stuff, sweetheart." Sweetheart. I let the word sink in. It burned more than the steam from the boiling pot beside me, but I didn't respond. I just stored it away. After that, I stopped trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Every question I'd asked, every time I hinted at ethical gray areas, he brushed it off. Like I was a house cat pawing at a puzzle too big for me. But he had no idea who I really was, and I used that to my advantage. The best agents didn't confront. They gathered. They let their targets keep talking, keep walking deeper into their own mess. That's exactly what I let Ethan do. The Bureau knew from the beginning that this case would be different. Not just because Redbrook Capital was high profile, but because the access point was personal. I wasn't infiltrating some unfamiliar boardroom. I was living in the lion's den. So I adjusted. I didn't file for divorce. Didn't put anything in my name. Not the house, not the cars, not even the art I helped him pick out. I let him believe he had it all. Which meant that when the time came for the feds to seize everything, there wouldn't be any obstacles. No legal fights over ownership, no assets hidden in joint accounts. Ethan Carter built his empire solo, at least, that's what he believed. He took pride in that narrative. The brilliant self-made man, unconcerned with prenups or co-signatures. What he never understood was that his empire wasn't clean. And I wasn't leaving it quietly because I lost. I was leaving it because I'd won. I spent years watching him move money through shell companies. Sitting beside him at dinners with foreign investors, nodding silently as he bragged about returns that didn't make sense. I watched his colleagues laugh at jokes that always seemed to come with a price tag. They thought I was arm candy mature, yes, but tame. Easy to ignore. So I leaned into it. I played the part. I kept a meticulous record of everything, voice memos of late-night phone calls, screenshots of fraudulent transfers, even receipts tucked between pages of books Ethan never touched. The Bureau called it the silent web, a trail of truth built in whispers, one piece at a time. At first, I thought I was doing it for the agency. For justice. But the longer I lived inside Ethan's world, the more I realized I was doing it for the people he hurt. Small-time investors who trusted his charm. Retirees who handed over their pensions to a man who smiled too wide and promised too much. I saw their names, read their emails. And I knew someone had to stop him. The final nail came last year, when he started coaching Brielle to handle client conversations. I walked into the living room one afternoon to find her perched on the sofa, practicing how to reassure investors over the phone. She was reading a script he'd written, one I knew contained lies. I stood there, frozen for a moment, Not from shock, but from clarity. He wasn't just corrupt. He was teaching someone else to carry it forward. That was when I made the call to the bureau and said, "I'm ready to escalate." From that point on, the strategy shifted. I got approval for the software installation. Began tracking his every keystroke. The tech team helped me plant devices in his office, in the car, even in his golf bag. We left nothing to chance. Now, as I sat in the bureau's private briefing room reviewing the digital footprint of Ethan's crimes, I felt the weight of silence lifting. For years, I'd lived between two selves, Danielle the wife and Danielle the agent. But soon, the lines would merge. The raid was scheduled. The warrants were signed. Every asset was mapped. And Ethan still thought I'd walked away with nothing. He had no idea I'd been quietly arranging the noose around his empire. No shouting. No threats. Just silent, precise strategy. He'd taught me to be quiet. Now he'd learn what silence can do. The hum of the surveillance van was low, steady, almost comforting, like the deep breath before a plunge. I sat in the main seat, coffee in hand, surrounded by a bank of monitors that glowed with Ethan's routine. Each screen displayed a different angle: the driveway where his car idled every morning, the foyer where he kissed Brielle goodbye, the den where he reviewed the day's market projections while still in his slippers. He had no idea we were watching. That I was watching. Agent Patel sat beside me, tapping commands into the control panel. All feeds are clean. No interference. We're synced with the Redbrook office surveillance team and the SWAT unit stationed 6 blocks away. I nodded without looking up. Confirmed. We go at 9 sharp. I didn't need to rewatch Ethan's morning habits, but I did anyway. At 6:45 a.m., he'd pour his coffee into the travel mug I gave him 2 Christmases ago, still convinced it was the best thermos he ever owned. By 7:10, he'd step outside, check his hair in the car's rearview mirror, and send Brielle a smug little wink. By 7:30, he'd be on the freeway, radio set to a business podcast that he'd later quote in meetings as if the insights were his own. It was all so predictably Ethan. I sipped my coffee and leaned back, letting my eyes drift across the screens. There was a strange sense of calm pulsing through me, not adrenaline, not nerves. Focus. Precision. The kind of mental stillness that only came after years of planning. Everything had led to this morning. The data. The digital evidence. The signed warrants. The airtight case file now sitting with the DOJ. And yet, it wasn't just about the mission. It was about standing at the edge of something I'd waited so long to see: justice, finally arriving for the man who built an empire on lies and expected the world to thank him for it. Signal strength holding, Patel said, tapping his earpiece. Office team reports movement. He's expected to leave home in 20. Perfect, I replied. And the house? Entry points are mapped. Tactical teams in position. Brielle's still asleep in the master bedroom. I almost smiled at that. Of course she was. The girl hadn't lifted a finger since she moved in. Ethan probably called it charm, her youthful spontaneity. I called it a liability. And in a few hours, she'd wake up in a house crawling with agents, wearing my robe, surrounded by boxes of evidence she couldn't begin to understand. Across the van, Agent Ross handed me a fresh printout, Ethan's overnight messages. No unusual comms. Routine emails. One video call with his broker at 10:30 p.m. discussing new offshore prospects. Still planning his next scheme, I muttered, scanning the transcript. Even at bedtime. Ross raised an eyebrow. He's gonna be surprised. No, I said. He's going to be humiliated. Then furious. Then quiet. Patel checked his watch. 17 minutes. Outside the van, the street was still. We were parked in an unmarked zone 3 blocks from Ethan's neighborhood, blending in as a construction vehicle. No lights, no markings. Just another workday vehicle tucked against the curb. But inside, we were a storm waiting to break. I glanced at the small display in the corner, real-time asset tracing. Over the last 48 hours, our financial unit had frozen 3 of Ethan's primary accounts, flagged 8 international transactions, and locked down 2 shell companies. His liquidity had already started to dry up. He just didn't know it yet. Everything he thought was untouchable was now within reach. I reached into my bag and pulled out the final piece, my badge. I hadn't worn it in weeks. Not openly. But today, I pinned it to my jacket with a kind of reverence. I wasn't hiding anymore. Not from him. Not from anyone. 10 minutes, Patel announced. House and office teams confirm green lights. I nodded. Initiate radio silence in 5. Tactical teams on private line only. I want no mistakes. Yes, ma'am. This wasn't just a takedown, it was a surgical extraction. Ethan had ties to politicians, board members, even journalists. If we fumbled this, he'd slither out like he always did. But we wouldn't. I wouldn't allow it. We hadn't spent 3 years building an ironclad case just to watch him walk away again. 6 minutes, Ross said. He's getting dressed. I watched the screen without blinking. Ethan walked through the bedroom in his robe, completely unaware that his every move was being streamed into a federal command unit. The irony made my throat tighten. This was the man who told me I was forgettable, that I should stay in my lane. He never noticed that I'd built the entire freeway underneath him. I took a final sip of coffee and set the mug down. 3 minutes, Patel said, eyes locked on the feed. The air in the van shifted. You could feel the electricity, the tension pulling tight like a bowstring. 1 minute, Ross murmured. The screens blinked. Door sensors activated. Motion in the driveway. Teams, go, I said. And just like that, the countdown ended. It had begun. The moment the clock hit 9 a.m., the calm dissolved into controlled chaos. On the monitors, every piece of the operation snapped into place like the click of a final puzzle piece. At Ethan's house, a tactical team swarmed the property in a silent, calculated formation, weapons lowered but ready, voices clipped and efficient. Their black boots hit the stone walkway in perfect rhythm, their movements fast, practiced, inevitable. Inside, Brielle had just emerged from the bedroom, her blonde hair tangled and her expression groggy. She wore the robe I used to wrap myself in during late-night reading sessions, the one Ethan had once said looked too modest for a woman my age. She blinked as the door was kicked open, the agents pouring into the foyer like a flood. Her mouth formed a scream, but no sound came out at first. Shock. Pure, unfiltered. Federal agents. One barked. Step back, hands where we can see them. I watched from the van as she dropped the coffee mug she'd been holding. It shattered across the tile, the liquid spreading like a stain between her bare feet. Her eyes darted to the hallway, but there was nowhere to go. This wasn't a raid meant to scare, it was meant to end things. Meanwhile, on the other screen, Ethan's luxury SUV was already boxed in by bureau vehicles. It was mid-commute, just as we'd predicted. He'd been listening to his podcast, jaw moving with a smug monologue he probably thought was clever. And then, blue lights. Sirens. He slammed on the brakes, eyes wide, already reaching for the glove compartment before remembering he had nothing in there that would help him. The agents approached on both sides. One tapped on the window with calculated force. Ethan Carter. Step out of the vehicle. Now. His face twisted in disbelief. I knew that look. The moment where certainty fractures into panic. He obeyed slowly, as if somehow dragging time would change the outcome. But time was done playing with Ethan. It belonged to us now. Back at the house, Brielle was being escorted outside in handcuffs, not because she was a target, but because procedure required control until the residence was secured. Her protests were high-pitched, disjointed. She asked for Ethan. She asked what was happening. No one answered. The agents weren't there to offer explanations. They were there to execute the plan I helped build from the inside out. In the van, Patel turned to me, eyes flicking to the corner of the screen where Ethan's phone buzzed violently in the evidence tray. He just sent you a message. I raised an eyebrow. Read it. Patel swiped it open. What did you do? He read aloud. All caps. A grim smile curled at the edge of my mouth. Of course he did. He was always better at blaming than understanding. If he'd listened, really listened, to even one of the quiet warnings I gave him over the years, he wouldn't have ended up here. But Ethan's pride had always been louder than my voice. He preferred it that way. I said nothing. Didn't reply. He could sit in the back of that federal vehicle with his designer coat and fragile ego and wonder how it all slipped through his fingers. That would be his first real punishment, uncertainty. The unraveling wouldn't stop there. Patel tapped the screen. You sure you don't want to say something back? No, I said. He'll understand soon enough. At the Redbrook Capitol building, chaos was blooming. Another screen showed Ethan's employees being escorted out in waves, some shouting, some stunned, others filming it all on their phones. One of the junior VPs, a man I remembered from holiday dinners, had tears in his eyes as the realization hit. The kingdom was falling, and the king had no idea it had always been made of sand. I watched Ethan's face on the dashcam footage as the agents read him his rights. He tried to interrupt, of course. Tried to demand his lawyer, his rights, a second chance. But it didn't matter. We had the documents. The transfers. The recorded calls. The offshore accounts. The silence he used to his advantage was now the very thing that damned him. For years, he operated in shadows, trusting that no one smart enough would ever be close enough to expose him. He never realized that someone already had. As he was placed in the back seat of the bureau vehicle, he twisted around, desperate for something, control, maybe, or just the last thread of dignity. But no one met his gaze. Not the agents. Not the civilians. Not even the camera. He was alone. In the van, I leaned forward, turning off the sound on the monitors. I didn't need the noise. I already knew the ending. Ethan Carter's empire had been built on falsehoods and hubris. It didn't require a courtroom to prove that. Just the cold, inarguable truth, meticulously collected by the woman he underestimated most. Team Alpha reporting secured, came the voice through the comms. Primary target in custody. Secondary location under control. Zero resistance. Copy that, I said. Well done, everyone. Begin evidence extraction protocols. As the van doors opened to the cool morning air, I stepped out slowly, my boots touching the pavement with finality. The streets felt different now. Not just cleaner, but clearer. For the first time in years, I wasn't watching from the sidelines. I was standing in the sun, and the storm was behind me. Let Ethan sit with his question. What did I do? Exactly what I promised myself I would. I ended it. The front door to the house hung open, the hinges still swaying slightly from the tactical team's swift entry. I stepped inside, the soft crunch of shattered ceramic under my boots echoing faintly in the silence that followed the storm. It was the first time I'd returned to this place since my so-called exit, and now it looked nothing like the home I had carefully built and slowly grown to resent. Now it was a crime scene. The agents moved efficiently through the space, dressed in bureau jackets, their gloved hands pulling up floorboards, lifting paintings, scanning walls with black light wands. Everything happened in quiet synchronization, but no movement was wasted. I knew exactly where to send them. Every hiding place, every false panel, every encrypted drive. Ethan had been clever, yes, but he wasn't unpredictable. Not to someone who had lived beside him long enough to study the way he breathed. Danielle, Agent Patel called from the hallway, his voice low but urgent. We've got the first safe. I followed him to the guest bedroom closet. Inside, a panel had already been removed to reveal the hidden compartment behind a wall of hanging coats. It was flush with the drywall, nearly seamless Ethan's handiwork. I stepped forward and keyed in the 6-digit code, the one I'd memorized after watching him enter it once in a haze of wine and arrogance. The lock clicked open. Inside was a small black safe, simple and unassuming. Patel passed me a pair of gloves, and I reached in. Inside were 2 hard drives, a burner phone, and a stack of banking documents, transfers, offshore routing instructions, falsified investor reports. I handed them over one by one, each item further solidifying the case. This wasn't about catching him anymore. That had already happened. This was about dismantling every last illusion he'd created. He really kept everything, Patel said, whistling under his breath. Almost makes our job too easy. He liked control, I replied. And he thought these hiding places made him invincible. We moved room by room. I directed the team to the baseboard behind the fireplace, where 2 USB drives were hidden behind a magnetic latch. Then upstairs, where in the attic crawl space, we found the last encrypted laptop sealed inside a thermal bag to avoid heat sensors. I'd seen Ethan stash it up there once when he thought I was asleep. He hadn't noticed I'd followed him in silence, standing at the top of the stairs, watching through a sliver in the door. While the house buzzed with activity, I received updates from the Redbrook Capital Office takedown. The agents there had followed my map of Ethan's digital operations perfectly. The CFO had locked himself in the bathroom when the agents arrived. The IT director broke into tears when they discovered he'd unknowingly signed off on illegal ledger entries. But the real moment came when Ethan was marched through the marble lobby in cuffs. I had the footage. One of the monitors in the van had captured it, the high-gloss floors, the dropped jaws of his employees, and Ethan trying desperately to keep his chin up like this was some sort of misunderstanding. I knew that look. He wasn't panicking because he was innocent. He was panicking because he couldn't spin this. There were too many eyes. Too many truths surfacing all at once. In the living room, Brielle sat on the edge of the sofa, wrapped in a gray bureau-issued blanket, her eyes glassy. They'd removed the cuffs after clearing her of immediate involvement. She'd claimed ignorance, and from what I'd gathered, it wasn't an act. She really didn't know. She was decoration, exactly what Ethan wanted her to be. When she spotted me, something shifted in her expression. "You did this," she said quietly, her voice more stunned than accusing. I met her gaze evenly. "He did this. I just made sure no one missed it." She looked away, blinking fast. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. It would take a few days to process that the luxurious life she'd inherited was built on rotted foundation. I didn't pity her, but I didn't hate her either. She'd been a symptom, not the cause. Outside, reporters had already begun to gather. Cameras flashed as bureau vehicles pulled away, each one packed with confiscated evidence, tagged and labeled. The world would know the truth by nightfall. That Ethan Carter, beloved financial mogul and media darling, had been orchestrating one of the largest investor frauds in recent history, and that his own wife had delivered the takedown. I walked out of the house slowly, the crisp afternoon air greeting me like an old friend. I stood at the top of the driveway for a long moment, watching the chaos settle. The facade had finally cracked, and there was no covering it now. The marble countertops, the imported light fixtures, the carefully curated art, it all looked hollow. Like stage props left behind after the show. Patel joined me, nodding toward the unmarked SUV waiting at the curb. "It's done here. The house is locked. Inventory's going to evidence." I turned to him. "Then let's go home." Because this wasn't home anymore. And maybe it never really had been. But I was finally walking away for real this time with everything I needed. And nothing I'd regret. 6 months passed, and still, every time I stepped into the courthouse, it felt like a quiet war zone. Not the kind with bullets and shouting, but the kind where silence carried weight, where each whispered conversation could shift an entire outcome. Today, though, everything was louder, more final. The halls buzzed with tension. Reporters lingered outside like vultures waiting for the last scraps of the story. They wouldn't have to wait long. I sat in the second row, my blazer crisp, my badge tucked neatly in my purse. I wasn't here as Ethan's wife. That role had disintegrated the moment he smirked at me on the day I left, thinking he'd won. No, I was here as the lead agent whose investigation had brought him down. No one in this courtroom saw me as anything less. Not anymore. Ethan entered flanked by 2 officers, hands shackled, orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the tailored suits he once bragged about. The man who used to boast about his expensive taste now looked pale, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the vein in his temple pulsing. His eyes scanned the courtroom, briefly landing on me. I didn't flinch. He looked away first. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the room settled into tense stillness. The charges were read again, though we all knew them by heart. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. Each count carried weight, but together they formed a mountain no amount of wealth or charm could climb over. The prosecution didn't need flair. They had facts. The paper trail. The emails. The testimony from employees, victims, and even from Brielle, who, in a bid for immunity, had handed over voice memos and handwritten notes Ethan never realized she'd saved. She looked thinner now, seated near the front, her designer clothes a poor disguise for the exhaustion on her face. I'd almost feel sorry for her if she hadn't once tried to laugh off my existence like I was a relic. The defense tried their best, claimed Ethan had made misjudgments, that he'd been under pressure, that he meant no harm. But intention didn't erase the damage. No excuse could undo the millions siphoned from hardworking people. Retirees. Small business owners. Families who trusted the man on magazine covers and financial news panels. Then came the impact statements. One by one, victims stood and described what Ethan's crimes had done to their lives. A man in his 60s who'd lost his entire pension. A single mother who'd used her savings to invest in what she was told was a sure thing. A nonprofit director whose organization had shut down because Redbrook had drained their endowment. Every word chipped away at whatever image Ethan still clung to. When the judge returned to deliver sentencing, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Ethan stood, his face blank, arms tight at his sides. I watched him closely, waiting for that final moment when reality would strike. 15 years in federal prison, the judge said, without the possibility of parole for a minimum of 12. There was a pause, then the sound of someone gasping softly. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. It was as if his body had turned to stone. 15 years. One for every year of our marriage. Not symbolic by legal design, but meaningful to me nonetheless. I thought of the 15 Christmases. The anniversaries spent pretending. The dinners where I swallowed his lies alongside my wine. 15 years of building a marriage on sand while he built his fortune on fraud. And now, he'd pay for each of them. As the judge finished her statement, Ethan turned slightly, as if he wanted to say something. Maybe to the court, maybe to me. But the bailiff stepped forward, already leading him toward the side exit. There would be no grand speech. No final manipulation. He was gone before he could rewrite the ending. I stayed seated for a moment as the courtroom emptied. The chatter swelled, journalists whispering to each other, typing furiously. Victims embracing. Agents shaking hands. But I needed just one more minute. Not for closure. I'd already found that. But to remind myself, I did this. I made it possible. I stood slowly and walked past the bench, out into the corridor where sunlight streamed through the high windows. As I reached the exit, I passed Brielle. She met my eyes for a second, and this time, she didn't look away. I didn't know, she said softly. I know, I replied. Now you do. Outside, flashes from camera crews erupted the moment I stepped down the courthouse steps. I didn't pause. Let them get their photo. Let the world see the woman behind the fall of Ethan Carter. Not the scorned wife. Not the accessory. The agent. The day was warm, but the air felt light. As I crossed the plaza and slid into the waiting bureau vehicle, I didn't look back. There was no need. The story behind me had reached its final chapter. And ahead? Something new. Something real. Justice, not just delivered, but done. The visitation room was small, sterile, and built to strip away any illusion of comfort. Gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 hard plastic chairs. Nothing personal, nothing soft. Just enough space for the bare minimum of conversation. I waited there, my hands folded calmly on the tabletop, the badge I no longer needed tucked in my coat pocket. This wasn't about the bureau. This was personal. When the door clicked open and Ethan was led inside, I felt the shift in the air. He looked different, but not entirely unfamiliar. His orange jumpsuit hung loosely on him, the sharp lines of his tailored image erased. His hair had grown out, and his jaw, once always clean-shaven, now bore the hint of gray stubble. There was a hesitancy in his step, like he wasn't sure what kind of woman would be waiting on the other side of this meeting. He sat across from me, his handcuffed wrists resting awkwardly on the table. He didn't speak at first. Just studied me, like I was a stranger he was trying to remember. You look good, he said finally, though the compliment fell flat. Empty. You look like prison agrees with you, I replied. He gave a dry laugh. Still sharp. I never stopped being. A silence followed, thick and expectant. He shifted uncomfortably, the plastic creaking under him. I could see it building behind his eyes, that familiar flicker of justification, the scramble to reclaim control. I asked to see you because I need to understand, he said, voice low. Why you did it? Why you didn't say something? Warn me. I stared at him. Warn you? Ethan, I did. Dozens of times. You just weren't listening. He frowned. You mean those little comments you used to make? About ethics? About gray areas? You never said it was serious. He stopped himself. That you'd turn on me. I didn't turn on you, I said evenly. I watched you dig your own grave. I just made sure no one handed you a ladder. His jaw clenched. You could have come to me. I leaned forward slightly. I did. For years, I came to you. As your wife. As someone who once wanted to believe you could be better. But you were so wrapped in your arrogance, so sure you were untouchable, that you never once considered I might be more than just the woman who made your dinner reservations. He looked away, his mouth tight. You blindsided me. No, Ethan. I let you walk right into the wall you built for yourself. He was quiet then, chewing on the bitterness of it. I could see it all over him, the humiliation, the disbelief that the woman he once called forgettable had orchestrated his downfall so thoroughly. It wasn't just that I'd worked for the Bureau. It was that I'd been patient. That I'd used everything he dismissed about me to become the very weapon that undid him. Finally, he looked back at me. I'm sorry. The words hung there, naked and uncertain. I am, he added. Maybe not for everything, but for you. I'm sorry I didn't see you. Really see you. There was a time when that would have gutted me. When I would have taken scraps like that and tried to build peace out of them. But not anymore. Sometimes, I said, sorry isn't enough. He nodded slowly, eyes dropping to the table. He looked smaller somehow, not just in stature, but in presence. The man who once filled every room with swagger now barely filled the space he sat in. I lost everything, he said. The house, the company, my reputation. You didn't lose it, Ethan, I said. You sold it off, one piece at a time, every time you chose profit over people. Every time you lied to someone's face and called it business. Every time you looked at me like I was less. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he didn't speak. I think about you, he said softly. About what we had. What I destroyed. I didn't respond. There was no comfort I could offer him. Not here. Not now. When the guard returned to signal the end of the visit, I stood. Ethan didn't. He just looked up at me with something like regret, something too late to matter. I picked up my coat and turned to leave, but paused at the door. You were right about one thing, I said. You never needed a divorce. He looked up. Because you were never really married. Not to me. You were married to yourself. To your image. To your ego. I didn't wait for a reply. As the door closed behind me, I felt the weight of the moment slip off my shoulders. I'd faced him. Not the husband I once knew, but the man he really was. And I walked away not in defeat, but in full knowledge of what I'd taken back, my power, my story, my name. That wasn't a confrontation. It was a conclusion. And I was already living the next chapter. The morning sun spilled through the cafe window, catching the steam from my espresso and casting golden light across the table. I sipped slowly, letting the rich bitterness settle on my tongue unhurried. Around me, the soft murmur of voices and clink of silverware blended into a comforting backdrop. I was here alone, by choice, not hiding, not waiting for anything to unravel. Just present. It had been 4 weeks since Ethan's sentencing. For weeks since I'd walked out of that prison visitation room for the last time, leaving behind the man who once believed I belonged in his shadow. And in those 4 weeks, I'd reclaimed more of myself than I had in the last decade. I didn't go back to the house after the trial. There was nothing left there for me. The Bureau had seized the property as part of the restitution process, and within days, it was stripped down and cleared out. Gone were the marble countertops, the imported tiles, the art Ethan claimed I didn't understand, but only purchased to impress his clients. All of it was sold off, the proceeds distributed to the victims he defrauded. Every last cent was traced, accounted for, and put toward repairing what he had broken. That, more than anything, felt like justice. I had moved into a small townhome closer to the city. 2 bedrooms, sunlit kitchen, a modest backyard where I'd started growing herbs, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the space or stillness for. There were no ghosts in the corners. No memories waiting to pounce. Just clean walls, soft linen, and a growing collection of books stacked by the reading chair I'd finally let myself buy. My days looked different now. I still worked at the bureau, same role, same title, but there was a new energy to it. I walked into headquarters each morning not as someone hiding a second life, but as a woman fully herself. My colleagues respected me before, but now they looked at me differently. Not just because I'd taken down Ethan Carter, but because they saw the clarity in me. The kind that only comes after you've burned something false to the ground and chosen, deliberately, not to look back. Evenings were for dinner with friends, real ones. I'd reconnected with people I'd lost touch with during my marriage, not because they disappeared, but because Ethan had no patience for anyone who didn't praise him. I'd let those friendships drift, embarrassed by how small I'd allowed myself to become. But when I reached out again, I found open arms and no judgment. Just quiet understanding. We laughed more now. Ate too much pasta. Took spontaneous walks. There were no whispers of scandal, no need to explain. The truth was public. Everyone had read the headlines. And surprisingly, it didn't define me the way I thought it might. I wasn't the wife of the con man. I was the woman who brought him down. That mattered. One evening, I went kayaking with a friend at the lake, the sky burning orange as the sun dipped low. I remember feeling the water glide beneath me, the rhythmic pull of the paddle, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. And I remember realizing, mid-stroke, that I wasn't thinking about him. Not even a little. Not about what he was doing in prison, not about the past, not about the years I lost. Just the moment. The stillness. The peace. Liberation wasn't one dramatic act. It wasn't the trial. It wasn't the confrontation. It was these quiet choices. The dinners. The fresh sheets. The laughter. The long walks without a phone pinging with secrets or surveillance. Sometimes I caught glimpses of old versions of myself, Danielle, the wife who smiled too tightly, who double-checked her tone before speaking, who knew the exact temperature Ethan liked his coffee but couldn't remember the last time she cried. I didn't hate that version of me. I understood her. She survived. She waited. And she acted when it counted. But she was gone now. In her place was a woman who knew how to breathe. How to sleep without the weight of a lie beside her. How to look in the mirror and recognize her own eyes again. I finished my espresso and stepped outside, the city alive with weekend energy. People moved past in waves, families, joggers, couples hand in hand, and I didn't feel separate from them anymore. For so long, I'd existed in the liminal space between truth and appearance. But now, there was nothing to hide. My phone buzzed with a new case file, Economic Crimes Division. A startup CEO accused of embezzling funds meant for veterans. I tapped it open, scanning the summary as I walked toward the bureau's satellite office 2 blocks away. Different criminal, same arrogance. The cycle never ended. But I was ready. This time, I wasn't watching from behind glass. I was standing in the center of my own life. Capable. Whole. Free. Finally free. The air in my office felt different that morning, still familiar, but lighter somehow. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I walked in, coffee in hand, case file tucked under my arm. The framed certifications on the wall caught the light, but they weren't the thing I noticed. It was the silence. Clean, uninterrupted silence. The kind that meant no more secrets, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. I placed the file on my desk and exhaled slowly, letting the stillness settle around me. This space, once just another part of the double life I'd been forced to live, was now something else entirely. It was mine. No more switching phones under the table or scanning documents in the dead of night. Everything was out in the open. The investigation. The trial. Ethan. Me. I'd received dozens of emails over the last month, thank you notes from victims, colleagues, strangers who had followed the case and wanted to tell me I gave them hope. Some came from women in situations not unlike my own, navigating lives built around someone else's power. Some came from people who had invested their savings and were now slowly rebuilding thanks to the restitution disbursement. Every message reminded me of why I'd done it and why I'd do it again. The Bureau had offered me a promotion 2 weeks after Ethan's sentencing. It came with a bigger title, a higher salary, and the chance to lead an entire division. But more than anything, it came with the acknowledgement that I wasn't just capable, I was formidable. I accepted, of course. But I did so on my terms. I made it clear, no more hiding, no more underestimation. I'd spent years letting people underestimate me because it made the job easier. Now, I wanted to be seen. I opened the case file on my desk, my first as division lead. A mid-sized accounting firm suspected of laundering political campaign funds through fake vendors. Sophisticated, layered, messy. The kind of case I used to study from the sidelines. I flipped through the documents, scanning familiar patterns, noting the discrepancies in the expense reports. It didn't take long before the puzzle pieces started clicking into place in my mind. The door to my office creaked open. Agent Patel stepped in, carrying 2 coffees. You beat me here. I don't sleep as late as I used to, I said, smiling. He placed the cup on my desk. Heard from him. Ethan? I shook my head. No. I doubt I will. Patel hesitated. Do you want to? I thought about that. The last time I saw Ethan, he looked hollow. Like a man unraveling in slow motion. And maybe that was the only closure I ever needed. I'd spent so many years wondering if he'd ever apologize, ever look me in the eye and admit what he'd done. But I realized now that his remorse, or lack of it, was irrelevant. What mattered was that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. Not the investors he scammed. Not the people he manipulated. And certainly not me. I don't need anything else from him, I said finally. He had the chance to do the right thing. He chose the opposite. That's his story now. Patel nodded, then gestured toward the case file. This one's already messy. Media's circling. The director says he wants it clean and fast. I raised an eyebrow. Then he called the right person. Patel smirked and headed back to his desk, leaving me alone again with the file, the coffee, and the promise of a new beginning. I leaned back in my chair and glanced at the photograph on the far wall, a panoramic shot of the FEC team at last year's annual conference. We were all there, smiling in our suits, unaware of what the year would bring. So much had changed since that photo was taken. Not just professionally. Personally. Fundamentally. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't living for survival. I was living with purpose. With clarity. With the kind of agency Ethan never thought I had. I stood and moved toward the window, looking out over the city. The skyline was sharp against the morning haze, sunlight bouncing off glass towers and casting everything in a soft glow. It was beautiful. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine to look at, freely and without fear. People often talk about closure as a door slamming shut, an event that signals the end. But for me, closure was a quiet walk into my office, the hum of a computer booting up, the taste of hot coffee on my tongue. It was the knowledge that no one controlled my story anymore. That I could write it myself, one day, one case, one decision at a time. I turned back toward my desk, ready to dive into the file. There were lies to unravel, truths to uncover, and justice to deliver. No signatures needed, I thought, the faintest smile curling my lips. Federal indictments worked just fine.